Hey guys, I'm Monica Bullington from Remax Rising, and today we're doing the second part of our two-part buyer consultation. So if you missed the first part, I'll link the video, but we discussed the people that were involved, kind of explained the process overall and kind of what to expect. So in this part, we're specifically focusing on the McLeacn County contract. So when I work with buyers, the best thing I can do for you is to set the right expectations. And it helps so much when you are ready to put in an offer. If you have already seen the paperwork that you're going to use to actually write that out, it answers so many of the questions. So going through this, I pretty much do this with like 90% of my buyers. Even people that have bought before, if they have never bought in McLeacn County or they have not bought recently in McLeacn County, I recommend going over this together because we have little changes every year. And if it's been 5-10 years since you have bought here, chances are a lot of things have changed. So I think it's good just to make sure that we're on the same page. So we're actually going to go through the contract today. I'm going to hit the highlights. What I found, this is a 7-page document, so it can get very overwhelming. There's a lot of the legal parts that I think can get people bogged down. So we're trying not to get too specific that you're going to feel overwhelmed, but hopefully this will help answer a lot of questions and prepare you for what to expect when you are ready to buy. So jumping in, this is the first page of the contract. So all of this information here is just basically the seller's information. This part here is the buyer's information. So a lot of that's just typing in information. So that's super easy. So then everything is, we do try to keep things on track and use actual dates, deadlines and everything like that. So everything in here is, anywhere you see a blank can be negotiable. And when we're putting in an offer, my job is to help understand what's most important to you. So when we're negotiating, we know the parts that really matter. Is it really you need the price, but you can be flexible on the closing dates? Is it you need to be moved in by a certain date, so you're going to have to be more flexible on something else? That's what I'm always here to help figure out, okay? So this part is really just explaining, there we go, who's the contracts between, so the buyer and seller again. Legal description, we're just explaining, which property it is. If there's multiple parcels, we're spelling out that with the PIN number and all that. So that's the idea there. Commonly known as, we're just filling out the address of the house. And then we're putting in the price here. So your initial offer, the chances of that being accepted right away, probably pretty low. So, that will change and we can edit this later once we have an agreement from all the parties. Any changes we make will be signed off by everybody. Earnest money. So this here, if you can, maybe I'll switch to a pen. So this part here where we're putting buyer has paid blank and on or before. So that's where we're putting the amount of money you're willing to put down as earnest money. Earnest money, if you think about it in a way that it's your prepayment of your down payment. So when, let's say you're putting 5% down of the purchase price, and your earnest money is a portion of that you're putting up at the time of offer to say, I am going to follow through with this contract and, follow all the rules. And if not, this is my sacrifice. So let's say it's, $1,000, $2,000. I have seen lower. It's all relative to the situation. Like I said, everything's negotiable. But let's just say, it's $1,000 and you put that in. So that money with an accepted offer, once everyone's signed off on everything, will come out of your bank account right away. Okay. Now, if you follow all the rules as outlined in the contract, that money will go towards your down payment. So that's where the prepay of your down payment comes from. Okay. If we do not follow the rules in the contract, then you do not deserve to have your earnest money back. So that is a conversation that we are always having up front because I want you to make sure that you're being earnest and serious about the transaction that you're about to partake, and that you understand the rules of when you deserve and do not deserve to get your earnest money back. Okay. And you can do it in 2 payments. So that's what they're kind of talking about here. If you do a second installment a week or 2 later, you can do that as well. We deposit the earnest money mostly into the escrow accounts of the listing brokerages, but there's other options as well, but that's what that's talking about. Each page will have signatures from each party. And then, I skipped this. Your closing date. So we are basically putting in there the best possible. We're putting in, when we're writing an offer, everything is best for you. So best case scenario, the price you want, the conditions you want, and the closing date you want. We know that sellers will often negotiate back and say, well, we can't make that day work, but we can do a week earlier or later, whatever. So we're just outlining, we would like to close on or before. So if you do, let's say May 30th, you can close on May 20th. If the home loan has gone through, everybody's agreeable, blah, 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 you can move that up. You do not want to move it back. So agents will often suggest pushing it a little bit further back, give the loan time to actually do its thing. Depending on the type of loan or cash that you're doing, that's gonna kind of depend on how far out we give you. There are some lenders that can go very quickly, and there's some that will just take a little longer, or the types of programs that will take a little longer as well. I would always rather err on the side of pushing it back and maybe moving it up than breaching contract and not closing in time. Because that's when, as a buyer, you're going to have penalties for not being able to complete the loan on time. I'm recording this right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, so there's some things to consider there. I'm always erring on the side of too much time now for sure, because banks are a little bit slower and there's some other things that are kind of slowing the process down. So there are lots of things to take into consideration on the closing date. Oops, this is not letting me drag. Okay, there we go. So again, I'm not going to get too much into all the legal stuff. Possession and deed, that's again kind of explaining the closing date. It is possible to have a closing date different than the possession, but really those are going to be the same date. Taxes. So in Illinois, we pay taxes in arrears. So in 2020, we're paying the property taxes for 2019. So when you buy a house, you will get a tax credit that is prorated from the last time the taxes were paid up through the present closing date. It gets a little complicated. The important part of that is knowing that you do get a little bit of a credit. So if the taxes are $6,000 on a house or $5,000 or $2,000, whatever, that does get prorated, because the point is at closing, you have a clean, easy split, and then the new buyer gets the money to then pay the taxes going forward. And we pay taxes usually June 1st and September 1st. So if you do close in May, you need to know that right away you're going to be responsible for paying that June payment, but you get the credit for it. Personal property. So the ones that are listed here are pretty much the standard ones that banks are okay with seeing. Lenders do not want to see things like hot tubs or pool tables or couches or other personal property like that. And the reason is, if you buy a house with a $5,000 hot tub and then you close and then somebody sells that hot tub, well, suddenly they think your house is worth $5,000 less because it's a removable, expensive item. So these are the ones you'll typically see. It does not mean we can't ask for other things. We just would use separate paperwork to not put it on the loan, okay? So everything else we're going to talk about now is pretty much just a contingency. So it's a way to get you out of the deal if something happens a certain way. So your biggest contingency is pretty much always financing. So this, because it's such a big deal, the sellers have a right to know a general idea of your financing, because it does make a difference, especially if you get into multiple offers. Somebody with a bigger down payment may and maybe a better, and easier to work with lender might be a more desirable buyer than somebody who has a more difficult loan program and is putting less down. So, but we like to generally understand the buyer's financial ability to buy the house. You will submit a pre-approval letter with your offer. So before we get to this point, you've spoken with a bank and they've pre-approved you up to a certain amount. Let's say you're buying, a $250,000 house, but your bank has approved you up to $300,000. Well, we would black that out because they don't need to know that you're approved up to $300,000. They just need to know you're qualified to buy that house. So we do specify if it's conventional, a VA, FHA, or other type of loan. There are houses that have peeling paint and other things that would be very difficult for a VA or an FHA appraiser to accept. So that's why those things matter. Again, to have somebody that's putting 5% down versus 30, 40, 50% down, if you did get into that situation, it gets the seller a better idea of kind of the financial stability of the person buying their house. Discount points is not something we use much anymore because interest rates have been really good and all that. So for the most part, we're not using that. And then closing costs, your lender will tell us if you need a closing cost credit. And what that looks like is, let's say you're buy $100,000 house and your lender says, we want to get maybe your upfront PMI paid for, so we need to ask the seller for a $3,000 closing cost credit. To you, as a buyer, you get the house you want and you get some closing cost credit. That's great. That brings your cash to close down. Awesome. As a seller, they see that offer, that $100,000 minus $3,000, they really see that as an offer of $97,000 because that's what they're getting. So when you're negotiating, it's important to understand how the other side sees things. And so that's what we would put in here if that's necessary. I typically don't recommend asking for closing cost credit if you don't really need it. You're basically inflating the price of the house to get some upfront cash. So that's a conversation we'll have with your lender if you need it. You will apply for financing pretty quickly. So that's basically once we have all this wrapped up, my team, we know exactly what the lenders need. We'll get the signatures, we'll get all the paperwork put together, and we'll send it off to the lender so they can get started on it. So you really just have to pick out the house, and we'll take care of a lot of the paperwork stuff from there. An important thing to note is we do have a financing contingency deadline. So this is really important because let's say we give your loan 60 days to go through and you lose your job. That's definitely a consideration right now. So if you lose your job, if we notify them, and let's say that means you're declined for the loan, we need to notify them on or before the date that is in there in order to get your earnest money back. If you tell them the day before closing, then really, we can ask for it back, but you really have no right to get it back. Especially if you just get cold feet or something, backing out just because you decide you want a different house or something, that's not really an acceptable way to get out of a contract. And there will be consequences for doing that. So that's why we play by the rules and we follow the deadlines there. And my office will keep track of the deadlines for you. It's a big part of what our team offers is just coordinating everything and making sure that we're keeping track of that because it can be very overwhelming to try to remember what all the days are and what you're supposed to do by when. Okay, so the next part is going to be your appraisal. So your bank will most likely require an appraisal. And the appraisal is basically the bank making sure that their investment in your purchase is a good investment and making sure that the house is worth what they're basically handing you to pay for it. So it's nice because it actually ends up being a protection for you as well. Because if the house does not appraise, the appraiser goes in there and says, I don't think that this is worth that house. If you feel like you were overpaying or something, it is a nice check that we have somebody independently verifying the value of the house. So your wood destroying insect provision. So basically that's just a termite inspection. Most lenders do not require it, but it's a really cheap inspection. It's like $50. So it's definitely one worth doing. And I would say in my experience, maybe 1 or 2 houses a year, I'm seeing my clients that it does come back with termites. And this is just kind of outline if that happens, what that looks like. We do try to do the termite inspection closer to closing. So, if we go under contract now and we do it tomorrow, well, you have 60 days before you close. Obviously, termites could then, enter the house later and start chewing on the house. So we wait a little bit to get that done. So that's just specifying that. The next one is your radon testing mitigation clause. So at your expense, you have the right to have the house tested for radon. Radon is a gas that comes through the ground, and it's very common in like older houses, especially if there's like a brick floor or a dirt floor, or there's lots of crawl spaces and stuff, because it's coming through the ground. And there's health concerns that go with that as well, which I can link you to other videos that go with that. But trust me when I say it's definitely worth you doing the inspection. The inspection is going to cost you maybe $90. If there's mitigation that is needed, then that's going to cost the seller $700 to $1,000. So regardless of your thoughts on radon, I think it's really important that from a resale perspective that you're going ahead and doing the inspection now. So this clause is basically just explaining, you're paying for the test. You have to have a licensed professional do it. The standard is 4 picocuries per liter is what's considered safe. So it's that or higher. That's when we have the right to request mitigation. We will have a deadline by which we need to complete the test and notify them if it does come back high. And again, we'll keep track of those dates, and we'll even order the inspections for you. So super easy. You just have to pay the bills. And let's say it does come back high and we notify them by that deadline, then they have the right to treat the condition at their expense prior to closing. Sometimes it is difficult for people to get that done just with scheduling and moving and stuff. So sometimes they'll offer the buyer a credit to have it done after closing, and they'll get bids. So we'll know, so-and-so said they'll do it for $750. At closing, you'll get a check that's made out to that radon mitigation company. So it's not like it goes to you and you can go buy shoes with it or Clorox wipes or something. You were using it for the radon mitigation. And you just basically call them and they've already agreed to it and everything. So then you just hand them the check when it's done. So it's really not much more work. Or technically the seller could rescind the contract. It's unlikely that anyone's really going to do that at this point. They would then have to, list the house again, disclose that they have high radon. The next person will ask them to do it. So for the most part, people are pretty obligated to complete the radon mitigation. Okay. So the big one, if you have bought in other markets or just if you've seen things on TV, the inspection clause, we do things differently than a lot of places. So it's always really important to know the customs for the place that you're buying. So this is really only relevant for McLeacn County. So this whole paragraph is explaining our equipment and inspections clause. So it's saying, unless otherwise stated in the contract or the disclosures that the sellers are required to fill out, all mechanics, equipment, appliances, fixtures, systems are all in operating condition at time of closing. Operating does not mean optimal. So when we're looking at houses and we're looking at a house that has a 20-year-old furnace, if it is still blowing hot air and it is not a health concern, it's operating as it was intended, then it is not defective by the contract. So you're not going to be able to ask a seller to replace a furnace just because it's old and at the end of its useful life, okay? So that is a big thing that people have a misunderstanding. Well, I'm gonna have to replace that soon. Yes, you are. That's part of owning a home, and that's just something that you are going to budget for. So when we're looking at houses, I'm pointing those things out to you so you have an understanding of how old the water heater is that's a little bit less expensive than a air conditioner or furnace. But so we're going to be talking about the roof. We're going to be talking about the HVAC age, the water heater, that kind of stuff. So, and I'm going to help you kind of plan like, okay, this is kind of the time frame you have before you're probably going to need to replace these items. Okay. So paragraph 3 is basically explaining at your expense, you have the right to obtain inspections by professionals that are capable of properly inspecting the items you're having them look at. And you do not have to have just a home inspection. Most people will start with a home inspection, but if you're only worried about the chimney, or you're only worried about the electric or something, you can just have those specific things looked at. Most people really like having a home inspection because it really gives you a good reference tool on how to maintain your house and the little projects that you can do. Obviously, they're there to find larger problems, but it's also just a nice reference tool when you're owning your home and you need to figure out, well, how do I take care of it? That's your 40-page document that's basically telling you that. So we do have a deadline by which we would do that. So that's what this is here. Usually we'll do the same date as the radon. Depends on how busy people are booked out, but I'll have a pretty good idea if we need to ask for 2 weeks or 3 weeks on the deadline. Again, my team will order the inspections for you. You just have to, like I said, pay the bill. This is paragraph C is explaining, minor repairs and routine maintenance are not considered defects by this contract. So cracked tile or caulk around a tub is not does not make for a defect. Okay, so the whole point of this inspection clause is to find items that are defective, and that's those safety concerns and things not operating as intended. So when you get a home inspection, it's going to be really overwhelming because you're going to see the report, and overall it's going to be like 40 pages. Then they're going to narrow it down to here are the items like you really need to pay attention to, and there might be 16, 17 things on that list, but only 4 of them are actually considered defects. Okay, so not all of them. Some of them are just improvement items, things like insulation. Your home inspector is going to say, your insulation had 4 inches. We recommend this. So it might be good for you to maintain your home and reduce your heating bills if you add some more insulation. Okay, that's not a defect. That's an improvement item. So that's what we're looking for when we're doing home inspections. Okay. And we have, so let's say we do the home inspection. So then when do we have the right to ask the seller to do anything about that? Okay. We have to find $1,000 worth of defects in order to ask the seller to repair anything. Okay. So the whole point is you're not nickel and diming the seller on, oh, this is a cover plate and, I need this and this junction box isn't covered, whatever. You're really looking for big items that will affect, the value of the house and your financial ability to take care of it, basically. So we're not nickel and diming on this stuff. So let's say we have those 4 items, but if the cost to repair those 4 items is less than $1,000, you do not have the right to ask the seller to do anything about it. Yes, you can still ask, but I'm going to tell you, the seller has no obligation to do this, and you're lucky if they do any of these things for you. Okay. So again, I'm just trying to set their expectations. If they did disclose anything in their disclosures, that does not count towards your $1,000 threshold. If, let's see, anything was readily observable and obvious, that's a big one. So things like a cracked glass pane, that's readily observable when we were looking through the house. You do not need a home inspector to tell you that there's a cracked glass pane because we are capable of seeing that. So the home inspector, they're really there to find things that we're not trained to see or that are obscured and not, we're not going into the attic and onto the roof and that kind of stuff. Speaking of the roof is not defective if it is free from leaks. So the whole point of a roof is to keep water out of a house. And if it is doing that, then it's not considered defective. If for some reason it does maybe have a leak in a corner, your seller is not obligated to give you a whole new roof. They are only obligated to really repair that leak at that spot. And if that leak is the only thing that's wrong with the house and it's only $500, then technically you still do not have the right to ask the seller to repair it. Yes, you still can, but I will tell you they have every right to say no, and you will say darn, and you'll just know that you have to do that when you move into the house. So let's say we notify them by the deadline of our $1,000 worth of things. Then they have a couple options. They have the right to treat conditions. Let's say it's a leaky faucet and they have the ability to repair the faucet themselves. Then that's fine. We can let them do that. There's some things that are going to need to be required by licensed professionals. So we'll negotiate that. They can give you a credit for the item to be repaired after closing. Sometimes they don't have time, or there's just something cosmetic about it that they would rather let you pick out the faucet or something like that. So they can give you a credit to do that at closing, or they can walk away from the deal and refund your earnest money. But probably at that point, they're not going to do that. But I think that's really in there in case you're just being absolutely ridiculous, that they can just walk away from you. So we try not to be ridiculous. And then so we're basically negotiating at that point to a point where both sides are happy, and there's going to be things that we care more about than others. We're not going to fight over cover plates and stuff like that. Home protection plan. So this is the next part. If we do end up looking and wanting to purchase a house that maybe the HVAC is, we only have a year of it left or so, we can include this request for a seller to pay for a home protection plan for you. So home warranty is also what they're called, and that's basically a year's protection. That there's a certain list of items that are covered. There's tons of different plans out there, so we can help you decide which ones you want. But most of the basic plans will cover things like your furnace, air conditioner, hot water heater, plumbing, and electric. There are plans that do cover appliances as well. Those are more expensive, obviously. So we'll, depending on what your situation is and what house you pick out, we'll decide if you even need to ask for a home warranty. You can buy one on your own. You don't have to include it here and make the seller pay for it. So if you are in a multiple offer situation or something, this is a good item to give up because you're basically asking the seller to shell out another $500 or $600 for you. So when you can just go buy that yourself. So something to think about there. Lead-based paint is your next contingency. So you do have the right to ask for a lead-based paint or to do a lead-based paint assessment. They're not often done. And to do this, the house would have to be built before 1977 because that's when lead-based paint was outlawed. So you do have some options regarding that. And then a lot of this other stuff on this page is a lot of just the legal stuff. It is important to note that you're going to have carbon monoxide detectors and stuff in the house. The sellers will be required to include those. On this page, this other section, this is where we have the chance to write in something. So depending on if there's something that we see. So for instance, let's say we do see a broken glass pane. This is where we would say, seller agrees to repair broken window in northwest bedroom or whatever. We want to be, reasonable, and we're kind of going to take this whole holistic approach to the offer and kind of put together the things that we're asking for and make sure that it is important. You can ask them to do pretty much anything. I've had people ask to paint, the front door they thought was just hideous. And they just could not get past it. And we asked for it and they did it. But, we'll kind of walk through what's reasonable given the situation to ask for. This part is just talking about who's holding the earnest money. This section here is your attorney review. So this is a contract that's been approved by the McLeacn County Bar Association for realtors to fill out for real estate transactions. It does not make me an attorney. You do have the right to hire an attorney and we'll talk about that when we get closer to actually writing an offer. This is spelling out that you have, once both parties have signed, you have a 5-day attorney review period. We will send the attorney, if you pick one, we'll send the paperwork to him or her, and they have 5 days to review the contract. And if there's anything weird in there that we've written in, they can basically tell us to rewrite it or help us out with that. And so you're just acknowledging here that you agree to that. And then this part here on this last page, I do not do dual agency. That would be if I was representing you and the seller at the same time. Work very hard not to do that. So if you are interested in one of my listings, it's very hard to pass sellers off, but I would have to have somebody else represent you on that purchase to make sure that you're being fully represented and I can still fully represent the sellers. So there is a possibility people can do that. I just don't do that. And so this is where we are outlining that we would not be doing that. And then this part is obviously just the signatures from everybody on this. So that is kind of a general idea of the contract. This is very specific to McLeacn County and 2020. There will be things that will change. So the best case scenario is we actually do this in person sometimes. I know it's not always feasible to do that if you're coming from a different area, or right now we're all working from home. So if you have specific questions, we can get on a video chat and talk specifically about what your plan is to purchase a home and your timeline and everything like that. So hopefully this was helpful, and stay tuned for other videos that will help you with your purchase as well.